So today we're going to look at another issue that we sometimes have when we're doing seams for our garment. This happens to be a scrap of fabric I had in my bin, and you'll notice it ravels out pretty well. It's a woven piece of fabric. Woven fabric tends to ravel. Blue jean material would be an example of a woven fabric. So what can we do to stop this? Let's put our straight edges together just like we were going to make a seam. Let's put this underneath our presser foot with the raw edge on the 5/8 inch. Let me get this on my straight stitch. And we're going to put our needle down, presser foot down, and we're going to back stitch just like a real seam. Now go all the way down, keeping this on the 5/8 inch. When you get to the end, another back stitch, cut your thread. Okay, now, there's our sample just to see what the seam looks like. Okay, now, let's open this up. And what we want to do is we want this part that we just sewed to kind of stick up in the air. Then use your fingers and open that up and do what's called a finger press. Yes, that's a real sewing term. Finger press, just like that. So it's going to keep most of that down. You'll notice the flaps here will stick up just a little bit. Now, we see these raveling here, and we don't want that to happen when we're going to make ourselves a new pair of pants, new shorts, new skirt. We don't want that to ravel. So what can we do about it? Well, let's look at a couple very simple things we can do. Let's take this first flap right here. Let's put a straight seam finish on this flap. So I'm going to look where my needle is, kind of make it go a little bit right of center. Needle down, presser foot down. You do not need to do a back stitch. Just sew as straight as you can down the seam allowance there. When you get to the bottom, cut your thread. Guess what? There's our first seam finish. See that? Now, here's the deal, and I don't know if I can get this to do it to show you. Every time you do the laundry, one or two of these strings is going to ravel. Okay, so what we find out with this seam finish that we just did, the threads on the fabric cannot ravel past where the stitching is. So once they get there, they're going to stop. That's going to save your real seam area from being damaged. That's what you want it to do. So let's look at a different kind of seam allowance or seam finish we could do. So let's just turn this over. We'll use the other side. We're going to use this other seam allowance here to do another seam finish. So I'm going to choose this time, look over on your machine. I happen to use a Janome. I'm going to select my zigzag stitch. I normally make my zigzag stitch 4.0 wide. That's how far it zigzags back and forth this way. And I make it 1.0 separated. Each zigzag is separated 1.0. That's what I use on my machine. So again, slightly to the right, but make sure your needle won't go off the seam allowance. Look where you're putting it. Needle down, presser foot down. That's the farthest right it will go. Again, no back stitch. Just sew right down the seam allowance as straight as you can. It does not have to be perfect. It's not going to show on the outside. Get down to the end, cut your thread. No back stitch. Now look at this. There you go. Now you have a seam finish that's a zigzag. And again, as this ravels out, these threads can't go farther than those stitches. Once one of those threads stops at one of those stitches, it stops there. It can't go any farther. So this is a straight seam finish and a zigzag seam finish. Both are fine. They both work very well. It's just whatever you want. Now, if you turn this over, you're going to see here's your actual seam. Notice those seam finishes don't show. So you can use whatever kind of designer stitch you want to do that seam finish. Nothing's going to show on the outside. All you're doing is protecting this seam. And that's what you want to do when you make a garment. So I know this is a new idea for our beginners. You practice some of these and see how you do. See you next time.